Welcome back to another Service Management Leadership Podcast. I welcome Hank Marquis back to the podcast. Hank, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Jeffrey. Thanks for having me back.
Oh, it's awesome. The first podcast, those of you that are listening, go check it out. So, disclaimer, Hank is a former Gartner analyst who is now a Gartner executive partner. His views are his own and not that of his employer, just like all the rest of us. And so, when we have people on the podcast, we have to make sure that we're sensitive to that. So, Hank, it's great to have you back.
Thanks.
All right. So, last week, we talked pretty broadly about digital experience. We talked about what it is and where it's going and all that sort of thing. Let's dive a little bit deeper this time. And so, you and I interact a lot on LinkedIn, and the topic of digital friction comes up often. And we've even experienced it when you and I have connected. What is digital friction, and how do we reduce it?
That right there is the $64,000 question.
Yes.
So if you step back and look at it, the whole concept of putting digital in front of things adds another word, but it is there for a reason. It'll probably fall off eventually, right? So you have a digital employee, which is a person who uses a digital workplace solution. And we used to call them knowledge workers, but now we call them digital employees and digital workers. So digital friction is anything in that service chain of tools, services, support that slows them down or makes them less productive, less efficient, less effective. And it's pretty easy to think of how that works. I mean, most people today have between 6 and 10 communication tools. I'm not going to mention names, but you can knock them off. You know who they are, all the big ones that are out there. Many of us have 6, 8, 10, 12 SaaS applications we're supposed to use for work. And in some cases, we're supposed to use this one and then switch to that one and then back to that one and then go to the communications tool. So there's this really complicated workflows that use all these applications, SaaS services, and communications tools and so on. So we've got these little Rubik's cubes being created out there, the digital Rubik's cube, and that slows people down. There's a lot of studies that say that folks switch between those tools up to 400 times a day. Other studies say that they lose 2 or 3 hours a week just online with support or searching for information about how to do something. And there's other research that says it takes people 6-7 minutes to get back in the zone after they task switch in the middle of doing something that requires a lot of thought. They're knowledge workers, digital workers, and they took off task, and now they're back, and they have to get trained again to get back into it. So, many people have heard this, and the common number is about a third today. About a third of a digital worker's paid work time is spent not working, if you will. It is spent in stress due to digital friction, and a loss of productivity is another way to look at it.
So when I think of friction, I think of maybe a car motor, right? That needs oil to keep going. And if you don't, things start seizing up.
Mm-hmm.
And so take that analogy a step further in our digital workplace, especially with the distributed teams spread out over, geographies, we have to make it as seamless as possible, or this motor that we're paying for kind of seizes up and we're going to have unintended negative consequences.
Yeah. Well, we see it. Digital friction is a direct cause of a couple of really interesting problems. 2 big ones. One is just plain turnover. People quit because they see they can't be successful. They can't achieve the outcomes and results that they want. The second one you can really zero in on is onboarding.
Yes.
The percentage of people who take a job and quit within the first 90 days is way higher than it's ever been. And that's usually because I got there, I didn't have a laptop. 4 weeks later, I got my laptop, but I couldn't log on. And then when I got to log on, I couldn't get to the app. And you know what? I'm already into the second quarter. I'm not making any money. I'm out of here. So that's digital friction. And you're absolutely right that it's pretty devastating because the cost to replace an employee is really high. And then they come in, they don't really know the job. So you have this learning ramp again. And so it's just, there's nothing good about digital friction. So lubricating it, if you want to think of it that way, is one of the best things we can do.
And if I could take that a step further and ask the question, in a car motor, we know where to lubricate. In digital friction, sometimes it's hard for leaders to understand that. So, what guidance would you give to leaders of how do you know where to
Yeah.
spot and how to address?
So much like we talked about on the last podcast, use your satisfaction service encounter information to spot dissatisfaction, whatever you have, whatever way, shape, and form it is, and then drop in and interview those people using something like ServQual and a GAPS model to be able to really understand what it is. And don't just go random and take one person from every work group or type of work. Focus on a particular pod. So if it's marketing and you're talking about marketing copywriters that are having issues, then talk to several in there. 3 to 5 will be enough. Typically, they used to say 35 for statistical significance, but with some of the psychometric things these days, if you can get 3 to 5 people doing the same job in the same role, then that's about all you need. So you could do that in a room, in a meeting room, and talk to them. You could do it a number of ways, but that's the best way to get the data. And then that's the RADAR data, the reliability, assurance, tangibles, empathy, and responsiveness. That'll tell you where things are, and then you can use that to reverse engineer back into the organization and say, oh, well, gee, we promised this, which is like a gap 3 problem, gap 4 problem, but we're doing this. And there's lots of case studies about that. And so lubricating the digital workplace is something that you can do if you use the right tool.
And it's hard. And let's just be honest, it's hard, right? It's hard for a leader to come to this awareness and say, okay, how do I get started?
It's not difficult. It's a personal challenge. And I say it's not difficult to do. You know what's difficult to do? Try, federating tenants across multiple cloud providers and providing DR. I mean, that's hard. Or try getting zero trust right. That's hard. So this isn't that level of detail. This is talking to folks. But what makes it challenging is we don't know how to talk to these folks. We haven't been schooled in the arcane, wizard art of psychometrics. We don't know we invent questions on our own, which is worse, using questions that have been really, really analyzed, not only theoretically, but in practice globally. So the questions you ask matter. So it's a matter of learning, adding a new technique, getting a new tool for the tool belt. It's doable, very doable.
So you talk technology. I have this belief that every company is in every school, every organization is really a technology company. We're all based on technology. There's nothing now produced that doesn't need technology. But every organization thinks they're unique. Their technology is special. They are unique. It's their edge.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
As I think of comparing technology company across industries, across the same industry, how can organizations differentiate themselves if pretty much all their technology is similar?
Mm-hmm. Well, you're right. And here's so again, I used to do a lot of teaching, and so everyone would say that, and I even had a slide built at one point that I'd put up to start every engagement or class, and it said essentially, yeah, Hank, but there was an underline. Our position is different, strange, unique, weird. Our customers are demanding this, that, and so on, right? And then I'd say, well, let me share a little story. So most human beings, we're all wonderfully unique and different and everything else, but you know what? Most of us at age 45 are going to get bifocals. It's a fact of aging. So plus or minus a few years. Okay, so we're all wonderful, unique, and different, and we're all exactly the same. That's how medicine works. It's the same thing with IT. Once again, there's nothing special about IT. All the technology is commoditized. How many office suites are there that you can get from a cloud provider? I can think of 2 off the top of my head, right? So pretty much everyone's using the same tools. And so the only thing that's really left is the people that are there and the leadership of those people. And it's always about results, and it's always about leadership. If there's no results, it's a lack of leadership. And I don't mean, sort of, antique ideas of assembly lines and, that kind of thing. I'm talking about co-creating, listening to the people on the front lines, taking that information, bringing it back, using it to make changes, and actually co-creating as it was expressed in the 1970s. And it hasn't actually, it's starting to arrive, but Toffler was a real visionary in that work. So, but at the end of the day, that's the people are the thing, and the leadership are the things that are gonna separate the winners from the losers when everybody has the same technology.
So let me tie two things together we talked about last podcast and this. Those who, and I'm putting words in your mouth, so correct me. Those who connect with their stakeholders, understand those needs, those outcomes, all that sort of thing, given everything else being equal, should have an advantage. Is that correct?
Yes, because the majority of people are not.
Right. It's very rare.
So there you go. So that if you are connecting with stakeholders, and you got to be real clear here. A lot of people think stakeholder is the VP of sales, and so just versus people doing sales, whether it's inbound, outbound sales, there's a lot of little silos in sales. So I think to take stakeholders down to the next level is where you want to be as a leader trying to do this, and because they suffer. Sales leadership suffers from the same problems I talked about as IT leaders on the last podcast. The VP of sales has no idea what the people that are actually, prospecting are running into. They think they do because they used to do it 40 years ago. They don't know now. And they don't ask anybody because they know they're the boss, right? So why would I ask somebody? I'm the boss. so yeah, I agree with you with that little caveat in there that, let's be sure stakeholders are frontline customer contact people. That's what really matters most of the time.
I would just say people at all levels, but you're right. We get caught at the top, but it happens with us in IT because we promote on a technical skill set, up through the ranks, not on their ability to engage and manage stakeholders. So there's a disconnect on what we reward versus what we really need.
That's one of the things that's changing. I see that happening. I see companies that are purposefully moving away from that model, working with HR to define progression patterns that are horizontal and vertical. So if you want to be the leader of IT, let's say, you'll have to have spent 3, 4, or 5 years working in a business unit as IT's customer, or else you're not qualified to be that position. So you're not no more technical all the way up. It's like over, sideways, back, maybe outside of IT, back, up, over, and then now you're qualified. So that's another one of those things that can set organizations apart. So it's all part of really trying to diversify thinking in terms of what it takes to get the job done. And that includes all the stakeholder and gathering information that you just mentioned, and we talked about on the last podcast, as well as sort of how the leadership structures are put together.
Yep. So you mentioned a topic just a few minutes ago, and you write about it often on LinkedIn, and that's the gaps. And the gaps in digital experience, and you name them 1, 2, 3, 4. And so I think when you explain what these gaps are, they'll resonate with people. So let me turn over to you to expound on that a little further.
Sure. Well, so there's a lot of things out there that have 4, plan, do, check, act, right? I mean, there's so many of these. Everyone's got their 4-word, phrase. So, but there's a pattern for that. There's a reason for that, a psychological, psychometric pattern. I'm not going to get into here, but I will say that when it comes to service delivery, there's 4 gaps. They're cleverly named gap 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, if you're familiar with IT service management and IT infrastructure library, gap 1 aligns very closely to version 3's service strategy, for example. Gap 2 lines up directly to design. Gap 3 is transition. And gap 4 would be in some circles it's called communications, in some cases it's operations, and in some cases it's delivery. But so the ideas there are that you have to come up with a plan. You have to design it. Once you've got the plan, you have to be able to put resources into place to deliver it. You have to tell people what it is and support it and keep it running. So those are the 4 gaps. And I'm going to go into them in a minute in a little more detail. After I'll pause and give you a chance there. You look like you got a question, but there is one more. There's a 5th gap. The 5th gap is the perception gap, and that looks at the consumer of the service. The first four are service producer gaps, things that go awry in the producer. Gap 5 is how those things appear to the user. Now that's where we get ideas of satisfaction and quality of experience and that kind of thing. That's what makes ServQual bi-directional.
That is very
I'll
interesting.
go into more about the gaps, but I want to pause there.
So that's very interesting. So let me ask a question. So we talk about the gaps. Would a important piece be to how to measure those? Not only that they exist, but measure their impact, measure their size, measure progress against closing those gaps, things of that nature.
Yeah. You got it. That's exactly it. I founded a company in 2005, and this is exactly what we did. And so it's really interesting. So you start at gap 5 and you say, are you dissatisfied? Yes. Okay, which of the 5 rater factors dissatisfy you? Now you don't ask it like that because they don't know what you're talking about, but you ask a few probing questions, and you realize that it's a reliability problem, which is basically it's not doing what it's supposed to do, and it doesn't do whatever it is doing consistently. Okay, so that's the R in rater. The first one, reliability. So now you're thinking, okay, so we're not doing what we're supposed to do. Bells should be going off, and we're not doing it reliably. That's just IT, right? But it should be working. So now you go back and you start at gap 1, and you say, okay, so show me the strategy document. Show me where we decided that it was going to do A, B, and C. Well, we just, we knew that. We didn't actually, put it on paper, Jeffrey. I mean, come on. I mean, we're smart people. We're IT. We knew what they needed. Their VP of sales told us what they needed. Right. So okay, so right away, like, well, let's actually see what they need. And so now you can start seeing how you can connect the dots. Another great example, we could look at gap 4, which is communication and operation. We see this all the time around the service desk and other customer contact people, which is where someone overpromises. One of my sort of case studies of my career was working with long ago, as I said, like 15 years ago, working with an international provider, and the deal was you'd sign up for this service, and you called the service desk if you had an issue, and they'd connect you with the responsible person. Okay, so salespeople, you gotta love them. I was a salesperson once. Okay, so but some salespeople would sell and say, listen, if you sign before midnight tonight, I'll give you Hank's name and phone number, and you just call him directly. You don't need to go through all that service desk stuff. Right. So now here I am. I'm the support engineer working on site doing something, and my cell phone goes off, and I pick it up and I'm like, hello? And so, yeah, I need you to work on this or that. Well, who are you? I'm an important customer, and they told me to call you, and I'm like, I'm on it. Right. So I stop everything I'm doing. So think about that dysfunction. Okay. So sensing that dissatisfaction in employees within IT works the same way as it does if you're looking at someone in sales. So the model is just this it's a truly holistic model. So I just went through gap 1 and went through gap 4 as an example of how to use the gaps, and the other 2 are no different, whether it's around design or the transition, people, process, product providers, they put in place, or they delivering and to the standards and so on. So then it becomes a very easy conversation, 6 or 8 questions for each of those groups, 3 to 5 people in each group, just to talk to, and in a day you can sort it out. If you start understanding what the dissatisfaction is, diagnose it, and then go back and say, show me which of the 5 factors, or you start with the most important factor first.
You probably want to baseline that so you can show improvement over time, right?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And the baseline will be gap 5. So if you you want to keep it in the zone of tolerance, that box that's built in our minds. And if you were down at the bottom before, they actually have measurements of service superiority, MSS, and measure of service adequacy. And there's a couple other arcane metrics in there, humanistic metrics. They're not. It's not. It's not throughput. It's not latency. It's service superiority, and so. But yeah, you can actually do this, and you can track it, measure it, see it over time.
But you brought up one of the most key parts that we have to understand. And this is my view. I don't want to push it onto you, but I want to get your reaction. That we can't use technology to measure humans. I think it takes human conversations, at least for the vast majority of it, to measure humans. we're not to that point where we put the diodes on our heads and we measure all of that yet. But
Right.
I think we're flawed when we think, oh, this technology is going to measure human experience. To me, that's difficult for me.
So it is, and that's what makes it difficult to scale for IT. You can't buy one, plug it in, and have it all work. We're seeing progress, though. There are tools out there that will watch how you use something and then try to correlate that with a satisfaction to pop up an NPS, kind of a one-liner, one question, and then say, oh, I think this person needs more disk space, or more memory. Okay, so there's approaches that are kind of like that. So I refer to those as proxies.
Right.
The only way that's been statistically proven to really knock it out of the park is to talk to somebody, exactly like you said. But there are lots of ways we can use technology to figure out who we should be talking to, and then be able to ask a handful of questions, the right questions, and diagnose the situation, and then be able to correct it going forward. So we're not ready for the the visor yet, right? We're not ready for that, but we can definitely use technology to help us understand who we should be talking to, and maybe give us some pointers, and reduce the total number of folks that we need to talk to be able to still do a great job.
And maybe help us with what questions we should ask them, right? Like sales is struggling with X. So let's
That's right. What
direct
are the results? Yeah, exactly. That's probably never going to come from anyone else than those folks. Exactly what they need to do, because they always know what's best.
All right. So as we close, and we touched on this a little bit, but how can organizations just begin incorporating digital experience into their strategy and execution? You mentioned the four gaps,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't want you to be confined to just that. But how can they
Yeah,
start be thinking in a holistic way about digital experience?
just change your point of view, adopt a new perspective, assume that you don't know that what you're doing is right, assume that maybe it's wrong, or maybe it's incomplete. Give yourself a little pat on the back. It's not wrong, it's just it was incomplete. And so, then go out and find for yourself. Remember gap one. The story that always stuck with me was about Sam Walton, who when he wanted to understand, I think it was corn or something that was being sold, he went out, got dropped off in the cornfields. He talked to the farmers, he talked to the farm hands, the people doing the work. He was there when the truck was loading. He talked to the person running the harvester. He drove with the truck driver to transfer the corn, and then worked with the people in the store. He understood the job, many jobs. So that's gap one. Maybe you don't have to go that level of detail like Sam Walton did for corn, but go find out for yourself, right? The more you engage with those doing the work, the better you're going to understand how you can help them, and by all means, unfiltered information, because gap one is filtered information. You're not getting the real story if it doesn't come right from the person doing the job. So I think that'd be the first one. I think secondly, when you think about gap two or design, transition, 3, 4, communications, and I talked about this a little earlier, but co-create. Go look that word up and understand what it means. It doesn't mean ask them a question or get a survey filled out. It means include them. It's almost like the Toyota production system quality circles in the 80s, where they would have people on the assembly line sitting with the designers and the engineers in a room to figure out how to make a better car. We don't do that here in IT. We actively avoid them and keep them at bay, right? So, like I said, when's the last time you saw a senior planning meeting that had frontline workers? So just the next one, have some, get some, go find some, and understand it, right? So, and I think thirdly, start small. The instant goal is I'm going to do this for everything everywhere, and you can't, you won't. But you can start now and pick something and make it happen, right? Seek out dissatisfaction, because that's where the digital friction is. Those are the people who aren't achieving their professional and personal results and outcomes. And so start there. Use the GAPS model and change your perspective and empathize with them. And you'll realize they're not users, they're people. They have names and faces and goals, families, all kinds of things going on out there.
Wow. And even on that, two people in sales may have different needs. They may have, because they come at their jobs different perspectives.
Mhm.
And you would never know that unless you talk to them, that you know Joe needs it this way and Sally needs it this way. And they have different outcomes or different ways of getting to the same outcome or whatever it be.
Just like we in IT don't really understand them, they don't understand us, you know. And I asked somebody, I was talking to a VP of sales once years ago, and I had ideas. I was going to share my ideas about how this person could improve sales. And he goes, Hank, that's really interesting. You got a business card? And I said, I do. And I handed him my business card, and he goes, that's what I thought. And then he pulled out his, and he says, and I am the VP of sales. A great lesson, right? So, but you're absolutely right. Don't assume you know what they're doing. And there are silos within silos. There's you talked about sales. There's inbound, there's outbound, there's web-based, there's prospecting, there's closing, there's account recovery. I mean, there's 6, 8, 10 silos. So think of them as pods or jobs to be done within sales. So there's not just like one thing. So you're absolutely right there. Just learn, just be a person, go be a human, get humanistic.
That's hard for us sometimes, Hank. That's hard. So, Hank, thank you for joining us on a couple of podcasts. We'll have you on in the future. And so, everyone, make sure you're following Hank Marquis on LinkedIn. And if you're following me, you'll see us tagging this podcast. And so, Hank, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure, Jeffrey. Thanks for the conversation. Good stuff.
Have a great day.
You too. Bye all.
Bye.